Thank you all for joining me today here in this beautiful setting in the Sit Law room. Since I'm a bit taller than the rest of the presenters, do we need to get closer to the microphone, or is it okay, or do the AV guide? Yeah, it's perfect. Thank you very much. So, thank you all for joining me today. I'm kind of humbled by seeing such a big turnout for this particular topic, because it's very much close to heart for me personally, which I'll show in one of the slides afterwards. So today I want to emphasize the slides. I've put them on LinkedIn. You can just download them, access them. I'm going to show the same QR code at the final slide as well. So if you're doubtful right now, you might be convinced afterwards. So you don't have to, take pictures of the presentation if you want to. It's fine to do so, but feel free to just sit back, relax, and at the end, scan the QR code. It's on LinkedIn. You can download it, share it, whatever, if you feel it's interesting for you or someone in your institution or company. In today's presentation, I always think it's important to get to know each other. Do not be alarmed. I'm not going to go by everyone asking for who you are, who you represent, etc. But just a simple, hand-raising exercise, just to get a bit of an impression who I am talking to, but also I'm going to introduce myself. Afterwards, we're going to start our deep dive into accessibility legislation by looking into what is it, where does it apply on a geographical level, but also inside of your organization. Why is it even in place in the first place? And for who does this actually apply to? And most importantly, what do you need to do? And how can you do this? How can you implement this within your organization? And briefly, and I have a lot of slides, but briefly, if indeed time permits, I want to go into the benefits this will actually bring your organization, your institution, and your student body. So in order to briefly get to know each other, I want to know who's in the room in the sense of who are you? Quick show of hands, who is actually representing a higher educational institution? Oh, I think we already have the majority covered right now. Secondly, are there people here in the room working for a company interested in workplace training, corporate learning and development? Yes? Still more than 2 sets of hands raised. Perfect. Anyone working for a training or a service provider creating material for other institutions? Well, still 5 people. Very nice. Geographically, we're in the UK. Who's from the UK, if I may ask? Then I no longer need to talk about an LMS, but a VLE. So please forgive me if I use the term LMS instead of VLE. Oh, and outside of the UK, other people from European countries? Perfect, nice mixture. North America? Yes, as well. Anyone from the African continent? No? Central, South America? Look, those are the people you need to look for in the Moodle party. Last year in Mexico, that was a good party. Anyone else from Asia? Yes, one more hand. Pacific? Australia, New Zealand? Perfect. Thank you all for the long way traveling over. Well, now that I've got to know you a tiny bit, of course, who am I? Well, besides, that's me, Jarno Aantjes. I'm born and raised in the Netherlands, small country. Yes, I do tick all the stereotypical boxes in going to work on my bicycle, eating cheese and all that. More importantly, I am a father of 5, or if we have a family of 5, 3 kids, a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old in education, and I love family. I'm very much of a social being, so to say. In my private time, I love to build with Lego. Yes, I'll admit it, I'm one of those adult fans of little plastic building blocks. But I emphasize this because I like to build something. I like to design and work towards a greater good. And secondly, I am a huge fan of Star Wars. So, in my opinion, Empire Strikes Back is still the best movie ever. If anyone wants to discuss that with me or have a, pick a brain on anything Star Wars or Lego, besides accessibility, I'm your guy to talk to during the Moodle party. But that already shows you that I like futuristic stuff, I like building stuff, and I'm a social being. Now, a bit more personal, who knows what that rainbow-colored infinity loop icon is most commonly used for? Diana. I didn't hear that. Come again? Bingo. Oh, sorry, that was a bit loud. Bingo. Yes, neurodiversity. Neurodiversity, the brain working different than neuro-standard. And the reason I depicted this is in accessibility, neurodiversity is a very important topic, or is an important target group. In my own personal sphere, in that little family of 5, my partner is heavily dyslexic. My own stepbrother is heavily dyslexic. And I have, one of my best friends has ADHD, very high level of ADHD, concentrational disorder. He is all over the place all the time. Very nice, but also sometimes for us very exhausting. But I have very much of a personal relationship with these topics in neurodiversity. Even more personal, in the male side of my family, we have what is called a high tendency, a genetic defect that leads to a high risk of macular degeneration. Now, for those of you who do not know, I'm not going to go into the medical details of that, but it means that my father's father, my grandfather, I've slowly seen him lose his vision. Currently, I see my father slowly lose his vision. And unfortunately, that's my future. There's a 95% chance I will slowly lose my vision to a large extent. So knowing I'm a social beast, I love constructing, I'm into, technology and futuristic stuff, and I have a high connection with neurodiversity and visual impairments. That's why I love working at ReadSpeaker. I'm the Director of Education at ReadSpeaker, where we help people through our text-to-speech technology and our accessibility solutions and integrations. I want to emphasize this is not one of those sales presentations. I'm not going to demonstrate anything about ReadSpeaker. No, I want to talk about accessibility legislation, to share more about this. And my goal is to make sure that at the end of this session, you all walk out of the room knowing more, also feeling enthusiastic and comfortable with additional, let's call them tools in your toolbox, to go back with a 5-step plan and actual stuff that you can use in order to improve accessibility through UDL to work towards more inclusive e-learning environments. So let's first dive into the what and where on accessibility legislation. Well, if we look at accessibility legislation, well, logically it's 2 different terms. It's accessibility and legislation. And if we look into this, we have to first define what is accessibility. In order to define this, I want to share 2 precise definitions, which are of the utmost importance for the core of this presentation. The first one is by W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, the organization behind web standards like HTML and various accessibility standards. Important to denote in their definition, it is about the design and development in order to make sure that your web content or your web environment is accessible to those people with disabilities. I want to introduce a second definition, which I'm not going to say is more important, they're both equally as important, but this definition is actually referenced to in a lot of accessibility legislation. It's the definition by the United Nations itself, and what I personally like about this one, it emphasizes not just people with disabilities, but it's about equality, giving equal access for everyone, just to make sure that everyone can be fully included. So it's not just accessibility, it's more towards equality and inclusion. So knowing what accessibility is, where does it apply, we already established that the majority of people might be from the UK and Europe, but there's people from other territories, other geographical areas as well. Well, overall, on a global scale, we have the United Nations with their Rights for Humans, for the Human Rights Committee that has set up that particular definition we just watched. And that particular bit of legislation that is ratified by all the UN countries is the baseline for any local or regional accessibility legislation, like the European Accessibility Act, but also the Americans with a Disability Act, and various other, whether UK, United Arab Emirates, South African or Brazilian legislation. And it's not just these countries, there's tons of regulation, of laws, of guidelines, of principles out there in effect across the world in each country. Now, it's only an hour, so we don't have time to go into each and every individual law or piece of legislation. So what are the overlapping factors across all of this? Well, it all boils down that all of them were initiated or based upon that initial initiative by the UN, and they all reference back to W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium. Like I said, this is the organization behind a lot of web standards like HTML, but also behind the, and apologies for the smaller print, the Web Accessibility Initiative, WAE. Within the Web Accessibility Initiative, there's several individual standards again. For instance, WCHG. Now, I think a lot of people might have heard about it. Maybe hands if you haven't heard about WCHG. Well, just some. So how does WCHG apply to you? Well, like I said, within the Web Accessibility Initiative, there's guidelines like WCHG. There's multiple ones. Who here has heard about from the ATAG? And this isn't the German organization for kitchen appliances, ATAG. No, this is the authoring tool accessibility guidelines. And again, you can download the slides afterwards if you want. You can feel free to take pictures. But the ATAG applies to software like learn management systems, VLEs, and courseware tools. So very much for the people in this audience and this entire conference, very much of relevance. It actually consists of two parts. There's one part, or the first part, Part A, consists of all the guidelines, all the legal talk about how the LMS itself, the authoring tool, has to be accessible for the users, the admins, so the people here in the room. You're working with Moodle. Moodle, therefore, has the responsibility to make sure that the interface you are using is accessible, whether or not you're using assistive technology or not. And then there's Part B. That second part states that any content being produced or being shown through that particular authoring tool, or LMS or VLE, is indeed or has to be accessible to the end users, the students, the learners that you are catering to. And this is a shared responsibility. First of all, Moodle needs to make sure that you have a solution that indeed is allowing you to present in an accessible way content to the end users. Luckily, it does. Moodle ticks all the boxes. However, I said it's a shared responsibility. If you're using Moodle and you're also creating all these instructional videos and show them inside of Moodle, if you're using all types of other authoring tools to create score modules to show and offer inside of Moodle, well, that's of course outside of Moodle's grasp. Then it becomes your responsibility of making sure that whatever you are creating and showing to your users has to be accessible. So why is this important, and for who is what important? Well, you've probably seen this number multiple times, maybe in different formats or from different sources, but up to 16% of the global population, according to numbers by WHO, the World Health Organization, suffers from a severe disability. As you can see, I have a lot of links, so that's precisely the reason why you can download the slides afterwards if you want to. If we zoom in specifically here in the UK, the Higher Educational Statistics Agency indicates that 17.3% of students indicate to have some form of disability. If we look from the workplace perspective, research shows that 70%, so 7 out of 10 employees, do not feel comfortable to disclose their disability, their problems, their hindrance, their inability to fully participate or be included. If we look at it from a European perspective, the European Commission did a report and their research showed that approximately 27% of anyone inside the European Union 16 years or older indicates to have some form of disability. Now, why are these numbers higher than the 16%? The 16% on the previous slide was severe disabilities. These are some form of a disability. So that means that not everyone can participate at the same equal impartial level. For instance, those with a visual impairment. If you're offering content in the form of videos, they cannot see the videos, so there needs to be an alternative description. People with learning disabilities or neurodiversity challenges, they might need to have a different way of interacting with the content in order to make sure to be fully included. Non-native learners, a group that not everyone directly thinks of. I always give myself as the best example for this. Like I said, I'm born and grown in the Netherlands. My secondary education was fully Dutch. I would say 95% of the curriculum was Dutch. Transiting into university with 100% of the curriculum being in English, didn't fully work for me, let's put it like that. I struggled. Because it was a linguistic barrier. All of a sudden, I was taken out of my native language and have to learn in a non-native language. And of course, there's always people with an alternative preference, a different way of preferring how to engage, how to interact with e-learning courses. In order to demonstrate this, I have a very short clip from W3C itself to introduce web accessibility, and I briefly want to show. This is just a couple of minutes, but I think it's a very nice summary of what I've just been telling up to now.
Hi, my name is Shadi Abu Zahra. I'm the Accessibility Strategy and Technology Specialist at W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium. And today, I'd like to tell you about web accessibility. The web is for many people an essential part of daily life, at work, at home, and on the road. Web accessibility means that people with disabilities can use the web equally. For example, somebody who cannot use their arms and uses a mouse stick to type, or someone who cannot hear well and uses captions to watch videos, or someone who cannot see well and uses a screen reader to read aloud what's on the screen. Accessibility has many benefits. For example, captions benefit anyone in a loud or in a quiet environment, and good color contrast works better when there's glare. Also, people with age-related impairments, such as reduced dexterity, benefit. In fact, everyone has a better user experience with an improved layout and design. A lot of accessibility can be built into the underlying code of websites and applications. Web technologies from W3C, such as HTML, provide support for many accessibility features. For example, features to provide text alternatives for images, which are read aloud by screen readers and also used by search engines. Also, headings, labels, and other code supports accessibility and improves the quality overall. Good authoring tools, such as wikis, content management systems, and code editors, help create accessible code, either automatically or with input from the author. Also, web browsers media players, and apps need to support accessibility features. W3C provides standards to help make the web accessible, which are internationally recognized by governments and businesses. Most well known is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. WCAG is also ISO standard 4500 and adopted in the European standard called EN 301549. It is built around 4 core principles. First, perceivable. For example, so people can see the content or hear it. Operable, for example, so people can use the computer by typing or by voice. Understandable, for example, so people get clear and simple language. And robust, so people can use different assistive technologies. Besides WCAG, W3C also provides the Authoring Tool Accessibility Guidelines, ATAG, which defines requirements for content management systems, code editors, and other software. And the User Agent Accessibility Guidelines, UAAG, defines requirements for web browsers and media players. There are over 1 billion people with disabilities, or around 15 to 20% of the population. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities defines access to information, including the web, as a human right. Most countries around the world have ratified this UN Convention, and several have adopted binding policies too. Yet, regardless of any laws and regulations, implementing the accessibility standards is essential for people with disabilities and useful for all. For more information on web accessibility, visit w3.org/WAI.
So now that we know what accessibility is, why it's important, and for who it's important, what do you have to do? What is actually required for organizations through this legislation? Well, if you boil it down, and like I said, a lot of this local legislation takes back to either the UN and references W3C's standards. First of all, you will need to comply to WCAG. That is across every bit of legislation. It doesn't matter which country you're from or which country the organization you are representing operates in. That is the baseline compliance. And secondly, every bit of legislation requires you to publish an accessibility statement, which is a statement that says, okay, this is our status quo, we tick all the boxes, we comply to this and this and this extent, but also, more importantly, specifies and requires you to explain where you do not currently or already comply with this legislation. Simply a statement on saying, well, we're trying to do our best, here we comply, and this is still to be done, and we do not comply because, for instance, we're still working on video transcriptions or something like that. Now, very important, in many cases, the ATAG is referenced as well, either directly or indirectly. This differs across legislation. So to whom does this apply? Well, if you look at the UK, this applies to all semi-public organizations and all public organizations. In the European and the US, it goes a tiny bit further. It applies indeed to all public and semi-public organizations, but for instance in Europe also all private organizations with more than 10 employees and a turnover or an annual revenue of more than 2 million euros per annum. In the US, it applies to all private organizations with more than 15 employees. So even in corporate training, yes, it is mandatory that not just your public information, but also your internal training is indeed accessible. And the Brazilians take it even a bit further. Everyone. Quite simple. It's easiest to interpret. All public, all private, semi-public organizations need to comply. So, knowing that, well, how do you turn those two requirements into an actual concrete course of action? Like I said, my goal is to not just make sure that you know what the legislation requires of you, but more concretely, what can you do to comply? Well, I prepared a 5-step plan, and this is the plan that we always discuss with the organizations we work with in order to help them go from what we call from zero to hero in accessibility. You'll need to assess and understand the needs within your organization, and I'll go a bit more into depth on the upcoming slides. Adopt universal design for design principles, and make sure that you train and educate all the stakeholders in your organization that are relevant in this particular process of e-learning. Make sure to evaluate and improve and foster an inclusive culture inside of your organization. Now, in order to assess and understand, and these are kind of open doors, let's be honest, but this isn't a one-man thing or one-person thing to look after, So establish a team. Make sure that you're not doing this yourself. You're not chasing a more accessible, more inclusive environment yourself. No, establish a team to help and share the workload. Conduct a thorough internal audit. Make sure that you know what your current stand is. Like I said, you need to publish an accessibility statement in the first place, so make sure that you know what that stand is in order to be able to make that statement. Gather user feedback. Ask students, ask staff members what their feedback is, how they perceive working with the LMS or your course material. And of course, define clear goals. Yeah, this is again an open door, but without putting an actual dot on the horizon, you do not know what to work towards. Second step, adapt those universal design principles. Choose accessible tools. Well, luckily, we're here at the MoodleMoot. Everyone already chose Moodle, so that's a checkbox. But if you are using tools to create video content, if you are using authoring tools to create score modules, make sure that the content they are producing is indeed accessible output. And I always advise organizations to make sure to implement universal design principles. This is more in line with that UN definition on achieving inclusivity. And I've added 2 particular links. Again, if you download the slides, you can click to these repositories, and I would definitely recommend that. They are very vast, valuable repositories with a ton of interesting information on this. First one is from CAST, North American organization. Second one is AHEAD, an Irish organization, who have really interesting material on universal design. And make sure to provide alternative formats to users. Based on that universal design, make sure that people can interact with your e-learning content in the way that fits their situation or their preference best. In order to give this a bit more, real-world experience, I want to share a very short video snippet of a webinar that we hosted a couple of months ago. It was specifically on the European Accessibility Act, in which we had several people from our network who are participating, including the European EdTech Alliance. One of our founding fathers, and the gentleman in the upper right corner is Emiliano Diaz Viloria from the University of Salamanca in Spain. And his point here really resonates with that previous slide.
Well, I would like to highlight digital accessibility as a key factor in promoting inclusion in higher education settings, especially for people with disabilities in university settings. It's sure that in today's educational landscape, where digital platforms, learning management systems, ebooks, video-based content, all of these are central to the learning experience, and accessibility in this setting is no longer optional. It's essential, I think. The European Accessibility Act provides a critical legal framework that obliges us to ensure that digital products and services are usable by all students, including those with disabilities. And all this aligns directly with the principles of universal design for learning, which aims to create flexible learning environments that accommodate individual learning differences from the start. This is the key point, from the start.
As a third step, train and educate your stakeholders. Again, interact with your team or any constructional or instructional designers, LMS admins, in order to make sure that they know what accessibility is, why it's important, what they need to do. Now again, links here, but W3C has a ton of information publicly available that we always hear back that people don't know about. So that is definitely something I would recommend. If this is a topic important in your institution, make sure to look into that information. It's very easy to read. It's nothing really hard to understand, but it's a very valuable source of information. Make sure that everyone inside of your team, inside of your organization is familiar with all the tools. Now, I'm not just talking about Moodle as a tool. That's what they'll be familiar with. But make sure that they familiarize themselves as well with all the tools your end users, your learners, your students might be using in order to access the content in Moodle. And offer support resources, both to staff and to students. And again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel and create something yourself. W3C and the HAT have a lot of online resources available. And inform everyone on this availability, but also on how they can actually report back any issues they might be having. Because if you cannot get that feedback, then it's a closed loop. It has to be two-way traffic. Again, to further emphasize this, another snippet from our webinar. 2 additional people joined the webinar a bit later. The gentleman speaking is Miguel Angel Dubois from the Technical University of Madrid in Spain. And does anyone recognize this particular woman? No? Name is really small, Immaculada Plasencia Pereiro. She is the driving force within the European European Committee, the Directorate of Justice. She's the driving force behind the European Accessibility Act. She's like the person pushing this legislation, and she's also now elected as the European representative in the UN. So again, ticking back to that UN definition, of course. Miguel has a very nice argument on making sure that people are aware of accessibility and allowing them to have resources to learn about this within your organization or within your staff.
As I always said that accessibility must be accessible. and that was a challenge because not everybody is able to build accessibility because they have no knowledge about accessibility. And this is why we work on the standard. If you have no idea to fulfill how to comply with the European Accessibility Act, go ahead, you have the standard. And the standard is for everyone because we are building the standard so that everyone can read the standard.
So what he actually says is it has to be accessible to get the information about accessibility. So make it accessible, make it available inside of your organization, inside of your team. And this isn't a one-time thing, you have to continuously evaluate and improve in order to see where loopholes are. Because over time you might introduce new tools, make sure to continuously check, implement those feedback mechanisms so that people who do run into issues can actually feed that back so you can improve. And don't just have that initial audit, no, have regular audits and use that data, whether that's quantitative from audits or qualitative from feedback. Use it to make improvements and to further explore improvements with all the various plugins and tools and assistive technology that Moodle actually allows you to use. That is the beauty of Moodle. There's a vast availability of resources that you can actually embed, incorporate, use in order to improve the accessibility and the inclusive experience of your e-learning environment. And make sure to foster that inclusive culture. Now, the best advice I always try to give is make sure from the get-go to seek involvement from either the board or if you're in a corporate C-level. As long as the person all the way in the top of the hierarchy is endorsing this, that will help you get forward, that will help you achieve, that will help you get this known with your peers, with other people inside of your organization. In order to actually know, or to have everyone know where to work towards to, create a shared commitment and post that. Make sure that everyone knows what the dot on the horizon is. And encourage collaboration by setting up all kinds of workshops together. And share best practices. We're all human, we like positive reinforcement. So if you have a success story, share that internally with the rest of the team. Again, a short snippet about this from the webinar.
However, I think it is very important to recognize that achieving real inclusion requires more than technical compliance. Accessibility is not just about accessible websites or caption videos. It must be understood as part of a broader commitment to inclusion that touches every dimension of university life, or outside the university of life, focusing solely on technical aspects, risk, creating a false sense of progress. And we also need to address things like attitudinal barriers, raise awareness among faculty and staff, and proactively design curricula and learning environments that reflect the diversity of all learners, of people that participate in society. And
especially that notion on looking beyond the technical requirements. That is what true accessibility is. Accessibility isn't just ticking the boxes on yes, Moodle is okay and it ticks all the technical requirements. No, accessibility requires that wider look. What if you're already using all of this? I assume this isn't new to at least some of you, maybe even the majority of you. Well, like I said, I want to give everyone tools when you go home. So yes, I do have some concrete tips in order to use UDL or Universal Design Principles in order to come to more accessible content. The main thing, the main advice, the best advice is always stick to the POUR acronym. This is the acronym created or thought of by W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium. It's actually actively referenced to inside of the European Accessibility Act, and it stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. It was already introduced in that short video from W3C. Make sure that people can actually perceive the information. If they cannot read the text because they're blind or have another issue, they have to be able to perceive it in a different mode. The actual interface, the navigation inside of your courses, your VLE, has to be operable. We saw a very nice example in the video with the person in the wheelchair operating through the mouth stick. Some people just simply navigate differently. They operate their device differently. So it has to be navigatable. And make sure information is understandable. And of course, now, especially in higher education, this is, they have to learn. But let's be honest. If you have an entire academic publication, an entire article on one page, why not just simply chop it up into chapters or alineas in order to make it more bite-sized, at least in the way of how people perceive it? And it should be robust. It should work across various different hardware, software that people might be using. Specifically for content design, the 7 pitfalls that we always see as an organization across all the partners we work with. Make sure to design with contrast in mind. Now, a very simple example, white background with black text is a high contrast. Darker red with black is already lesser contrast. It's lesser perceivable. People might have a certain color blindness or because of neurodiversity challenges need to have that contrast. Keep that in mind. And again, there's links to specific pages on the W3C website that explain this and that have a lot of collateral, a lot of information and videos that you can actually use inside your organization to share this with coworkers. Make sure that navigation is not dependent on an actual mouse. Not everyone can actually use a mouse or a mouse pad, just like we saw in the video. Break up those dense, long blocks of content. This is one of the main factors that we see that kills student or learner engagement. They just simply do not like to keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling all the way to the end of the page. And describe visual elements. If you have an image, make sure that you add a relevant alternative description. It's actually a hard requirement, but it's something a lot of organizations, a lot of people do not directly think of. If you have a graph, have an image, describe it. Because if someone has a visual impairment, they need to be able to have their assistive technology read out that alternative description. Similarly to videos. Who in the room uses video content in their e-learning courses? And who actively adds captions? Still, good number, but not 100%. If someone has a hearing impairment, you might see people speak in the video, but the people with a hearing impairment cannot see what is being said. So add captions. There's plenty of easy tools to use to automate this. Add captions and allow them to read a transcript afterwards. And offer a choice in content. Don't just force people to just consume one type of content. No, allow them to have a choice. It could be text, audio, video, whatever type of interactions they might have. Allowing them that choice gives them, you empower your learner themselves to choose what fits them best, either all the time or in that particular situation. Actually, 2 links on this particular one, because this is a very much emphasized point by W3C itself as well. So how does all of this benefit your organization? What do you get out of this? Well, the first one is an open door. You have to comply to regulation. And in order to comply, you avoid any corrective measures you might need to take or any penalties that might be placed upon. More importantly, it's student retention. If people actually like or do not run into barriers, they'll be more happy students. You'll help them succeed because they can actually access your course material in a better sense. And let's be honest, a dropout is tuition lost. Especially nowadays with pressure on budgets, it's important to actually retain your students. And it also improves course completion rates. We've seen actual case studies where courses were more accessible or better accessible in allowing for alternative formats for students to use to have up to 54% higher completion rates by students. 54%. It's not a minor improvement, no, that's an actual big difference. And of course, with the embedded factor that accessibility legislation is a must for any procurement or public grants you might want to apply for or your organization might want to apply for. You will future-proof those processes by making sure that your VLE, your course material, is accessible. And of course, improved reputation. And you lay the foundation for a universal, more inclusive design for learning in your organization. With that, I'd like to thank you all for your attention. I know it's not the most exciting topic, but hopefully my goal to give you more information has indeed helped. I hope you at least feel as if you have some more tools in your toolbox. And feel free to copy the slides. All the links in there work. You can directly access all that information in either CAST or AHEAD or W3C's repositories. If anyone does have a question, I'm happy to answer. If anyone does want to have a discussion, whether that's on accessibility, Lego, or Star Wars, I'm downstairs in the basement, but if someone does have a question now, if time permits, how long do we still... Oh, we have plenty of time. Thank you all. Can we get a bit more light in the room? I can't see anyone, so.
As a fellow Dutchie, hello.
Hoi.
Hoi. I had a question. I have multiple questions, but I'll reduce it to one. We see an increasement as well in climate change and heat. Heat has also a lot of disadvantage in learning. Are there any ways in accessibility where we can be future-proof and for instance, heat or other climate change? It's a little bit off topic, but I just wondered if you had any thoughts about this.
Very good. One, indeed, a bit off topic from e-learning. Well, allowing learners to engage with e-learning, your content, at a place of their own preference, whether that's at home next to a van or somewhere else, in order to make sure that they feel comfortable instead of in a more uncomfortable situation, of course, will improve their engagement with content, with your e-learning material. Furthermore, there's plenty of tools you can actually choose that might not be heavily reliant on all kinds of AI and power-hungry GPU data centers in order to at least use lesser energy for your own activities as an organization to contribute to hopefully lesser climate change in the future. I hope that at least covers somewhat of your...
A little bit, but I do think that heat is a part of you kind of hazy. And I was wondering how much, for instance, design could add towards that haziness. Again, it's off topic. You could also say pass, and then
well,
related on it.
On a personal note, so I've in my days with like 25 years ago when I was still in college, which organization do you represent?
Unfortunately, I cannot disclose.
Oh, okay. I hope you're not from the University of Utrecht. Okay. Whew. They had a library that heated up like really bad because there was a lot of glass. And that haziness, I actually experienced that myself. Being able to not having to focus on the screen all the time and just having that difference in mode of consuming information, the alternative formats I just described, being able to alter from reading to video to listening, that helps you stay awake. Same thing in a car. If you're driving a long way, you might go, I don't know, skiing in the Alps, and you decide to drive in the night. Watching the same road all the time makes you doze off. So you turn on the radio for distraction, just to tweak that little brain. You might drink a bit of coffee or cocoa, chocolate milk, shown to have the same effect, just to make sure that you stimulate your body, stimulate your brain in a different way. Within e-learning, alternative formats, and that's precisely why there were 2 links on that particular topic in the slide deck. Alternative formats, giving people choice, that will be my recommendation in that particular sense. Because every person is different, let's be honest. You might prefer to read, I might prefer to listen. Nicolas might prefer to have a beer afterwards and consume in a different way. But you get the point. And for instance, with something, and I don't want to go into too much of a sales mode, but something I always use to make that apparent to the audience. I have a question I always ask people. I say, well, think of a topic of personal interest. So it could be mindfulness, investing, I don't know, something historical. And then ask yourself the question, would you want to read a book or listen to a podcast about this? Every audience I ask this, it's always 60-40, 50-50. People are all different. We want to consume in different ways. So just offering one format doesn't work for everyone. I hope that further provides an answer. Thank you. Yes?
It's kind of following on from that a little bit, because we've got a very global audience with our learners, and things like video and audio are blocked in certain parts of the world. They can't access them. And in some parts of the world, they create bandwidth issues when we try and get around the issue of hosting it on a platform that's blocked in one country by putting it directly in the platform. Then the file size goes up, and then it's inaccessible to somebody else. And being able to create those alternative formats and create that choice can actually make it either actually inaccessible to some people, or prohibitively costly when there's very restricted budget. So where would you sort of see the balancing act coming in between making something accessible but looking at your restrictions that you've got in place with your audience and your organizational strategy?
It's actually a very good topic you touch upon, because the concept of accessibility, of course, I zoomed in on web accessibility, but actual accessibility on being able to access something in the first place, like a video. It might be blocked. If you use YouTube video, some countries might block YouTube or any other video platform, or you might not have access to the internet. Well, let's be honest, no access to the internet is no access to Moodle, so that's kind of a big issue. There are different ways to offering alternative formats. So a visual format could also be an image. It doesn't have to be a moving image like a video. It could be something to depict using icons. That's why I always try to use icons myself as well. It doesn't always have to be text. If you do have to at least convey a specific message, text or actual curriculum content, and you cannot deviate from text, then at least chop it up in those smaller blocks. Give people bite-sized learnings. You know, that micro-learning might be one of those really fancy, flashy terms. But yes, people's concentration span nowadays is becoming shorter and shorter because of all this, input, all the flashy social media we get bombarded with. Shorter clips or shorter pieces of text, maybe even cartoonify certain courses as an alternative format, just to have that, like I just described, different trigger in your brain by using a different part of your brain in order to actually visually read. So I hope that provides a bit of an answer to inspire, because we've seen organizations actually use cartoons in order to educate, specifically K-12, but in order to educate children in African regions, in order to make sure that there is a choice in format. Any other questions from the audience? Two, I see.
Great presentation. Just one question in regards to, I'm an instructional designer and I work with a lot of people that are very, very focused on aesthetics and functionality and having everything look great and work perfectly. Now, if I say I think that amazing thing should have a transcript in addition to captions, like, we know that it has value, but they may push back against that. So what is a common way to actually deal with that pushback?
Seek that board or C-level endorsement. Make sure to get to that shared goal, that shared commitment, and reference back to, this is what our board, this is what C-level states, we have to do this in order to comply. Secondly, a lot of instructional designers, and this is gradually decreasing, but a lot of instructional designers, not knowing the full requirements, they perceive accessible design as boring design, which isn't the case. It's just making sure that there's, for instance, what I mentioned on contrast, keep contrast in mind. It could be a very slight change in color that can make a big difference. Not just from the technical perspective on having enough contrast to actually tick the requirements, but it can make a big difference for the actual user to have a better perceivability. And simply enable something like dark mode. giving people that different choice as well. So it doesn't always have to be nice and flashy. That could be the default, but then give them another option as well. It's that self-empowerment by giving people, hey, you get to choose what you want to do with our content, in our VLE. Another question. I hope, by the way, that helps your question. Happy to discuss afterwards, of course. Yeah.
Another question from me. I was wondering, what is a missed disability? We talk about visually impairment, quite visible. Certainly no pun intended on that one. But for instance, low literacy. I've heard that I think about 25% of students on the trade school levels has low literacy. Can you name another one, which is an easily forgotten disability that we could look at?
Where did you fly in? Which airport? Or did you take a ferry?
Schiphol to Edinburgh.
To Edinburgh, the EDI. They're not that visible. I was actively looking for the actual signs. The people from the UK might back me up on this one. The signs with the sunflower for we support invisible disabilities. Yes, I see people nodding. It's not just me. I think that personally is a beautiful initiative because there indeed are a lot of invisible disabilities. Neurodiversity challenges are by far the most easy to understand. You can never see if someone is dyslexic. You cannot see if someone has ADHD. You cannot see if someone has autism. I mean, I see so many faces in this room. There's bound to be someone here. If there's nobody here with dyslexia or autism, I'll jump out of the building and kill myself because I'll take that bet. So those are the best examples. Yes, low literacy is definitely on a global scale a big issue, and especially in corporate education, especially vocational education, in warehousing, transportation, construction, all those professions where people actually use their hands, like an actual hands-on mentality, just like you said, no pun intended. That is where a lot of neurodiversity challenges are active. And that's also where a lot of low literacy or lesser literacy. It's not illiteracy, it's low literacy. And it varies on a scale. It's not like people cannot read at all. But it does indeed affect their speed of course completion. It affects their engagement inside of the course. It affects their success ratios. So a very good question, and those indeed are the most, besides literacy issues, neurodiversity is by far the most invisible. Well, it's a name for multiple, I don't like to call them disabilities, but other abilities that indeed inhibit people, form a barrier for their consumption of course material.
So, last question?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess actually possibly it'd be very interesting to talk about afterwards with it, but in terms of things that get missed, it seems to be transient access needs of any kind. So if someone breaks an arm, or they're suddenly in hospital for a little while or anything like that, which is always an interesting topic to talk about because accessibility is often thought about in terms of permanent needs, when actually it can be situational or transient and temporary. I grew up as a carer, so I had different access needs than my disabled siblings did. But they were the ones that got missed. So it's less a question and more just interesting if we missed each other afterward, just an interesting follow-up on it. So.
No, it's a very good addition, especially the situational or the temporary part of what you're adding to this. I mentioned something about a skiing trip. If you break your leg or break your arm, if I break my right arm right now, I have a temporary disability. I'm right-handed, so that really makes me be lesser mobile on the mouse pad and a keyboard. Could be indeed situational in the sense of if I lose my glasses, I have an issue. I can no longer see the people in the audience that well. I can see their shapes, but if someone's laughing or crying or sticking up a finger, it's going to be hard. Similarly, just like you described in your question on that haze, that is a situational inaccessibility. Because that temperature or that situation, or someone might be up for 14, 15, 16 hours, you get tired, that is a situational issue that might inhibit you on actively and 100% engaging with course material. So yeah, very good addition. Thank you for that. Let's wrap it up.